Hello students, in this video I am going to explain you chapter number 12, Reproduction in Plants from class 7th NCERT Science. Like begets like. This is the unique characteristic of all living beings. All living beings, be it the plants or the animals, give rise to more of their own kinds. All living beings have a definite lifespan. That is, they ultimately die. But before they die, they give birth to their young ones. So, the process by which the living beings produce their young ones of their own kind is called reproduction. This is a very important process because it ensures continuity of life from generations to generations. Children, in class 6, you studied chapter Plants, in which you studied that flowers are the reproductive parts of the plant. Flowers, they produce fruits which contain seeds. Seeds germinate into a new plant. Children, you also know that there are wide variety of plants. Some plants may be very small, that is unicellular, and some may be big enough, that is multicellular. But all plants reproduce and they grow into a new one. There are different ways by which the plants reproduce, and in this chapter we are going to study about the types of reproduction, or you can say the modes of reproduction. There are two types of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. In this chapter, you are going to study in detail about the asexual and the sexual reproduction.
In asexual reproduction, only one parent is needed, resulting in offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. In plants, asexual reproduction occurs without seeds, whereas in sexual reproduction, two parent, one male and one female are required. Each parent produces one reproductive cells called gametes. The male produces sperm and the female produces the egg or ovum. The offsprings have a mix of inherited genes. In plants, sexual reproduction occurs by the formation of seeds. Different methods of asexual reproduction in plants are: number 1, vegetative propagation. Common example: rose, jasmine, potatoes, ginger, etc. Budding. Example: yeast, hydra. Third is fragmentation. Common example: spirogyra, which is a form of algae. Fourth, spore formation. Example: bread mold, fern, mosses. These are the few asexual methods of reproduction in plants. Reproduction from the vegetative parts without the help of any reproductive organ is called vegetative propagation. The parts of plant like stems, roots and leaves, which are generally not meant for reproduction, are called vegetative parts. Sometimes the vegetative parts of some plants give rise to a new plant. This mode of reproduction is called vegetative propagation. This may take place naturally or can be done artificially. Vegetative reproduction has several advantages. This can be propagated relatively faster through vegetative reproduction method. The parental characters can be retained in the young ones. Plants which do not produce seeds can also be propagated. Seedless seedless varieties of some fruits can be produced. Vegetative propagation is a very economical method. Vegetative propagation in rows is done by cutting the stem. In this method, the healthy young branch of plant having leaf bud is cut off and planted in moist soil. The cutting develops roots and grows into a new plant. This method is used to propagate plants like rose, bougainvillea and sugarcane. Then, layering method, commonly done in plants like jasmine, in which a young branch is bent towards the ground and covered with moist soil. After some time, the root develops from the covered part and this grows into a young plant. This method is called layering. Potato is an underground stem tuber. When it is cut into parts and planted in the soil, each part with an eye develops into a new potato plant. At each eye is a bud which can develop into a new plant. New plants are also produced by parts of underground stem in ginger and from bulbs of onion and lily and tulip. Bulb are underground stems with thick leaves. New plants are also obtained from leaves, roots and shoots of some plants. The leaves of bryophyllum has many buds on its margin. These buds give rise to new plants. The bud appears in the notches. These buds grow and give rise to miniature plants on the margin of the leaf. These plants drop off and develop into mature plants. The duckweed, which is an aquatic plant, reproduces almost entirely by this method. In budding, a bulb-like projection called bud appears on the body of the parent organism. This bud grows into an offspring and may eventually break away from the parent. Yeast reproduces by budding. In yeast, a little cytoplasm accumulates at one end of the cell and a bud is formed. The nucleus divides into two. One of them enters the bud. The bud grows and eventually gets detached from the parent cell to form a new cell. The process continues and a large number of yeast cells are produced in a short time. If the supply of nutrition is enough, the bud formation occurs rapidly to form a chain of yeast cells. In corals and sponges, buds do not separate out but remains attached to the parent organism. They grow to full size and reproduces again and again, producing a colony. In certain algae, such as Spirogyra, a long ribbon-like or filamentous body break up into two or more parts called fragments. The breaking of a body into one or more parts is called fragmentation. Each fragment then grows into a new individual. The ability of living things to repair themselves or grow the damaged part is also called regeneration. For this type of reproduction, the plant should have good power of regeneration. Some bacteria and lower form of life form spores. The spore are small, single-celled reproductive body which are covered by a thick and hard protective coating. This protective layer helps it to survive under unfavorable conditions such as extremely high temperature, lack of food and water. When the conditions become favorable, the thick coating breaks open and the spore germinates to produce new plants. The mucor, fern, moss, and the bread mold reproduces asexually by spore formation. White fluffy mass growing on the surface of moist stale bread is the germinating spore of Rhizopus. Most animals and plants reproduce sexually. For sexual reproduction to occur, two parents, one male and other female, are required. Each parent produces one reproductive cell or gametes. Male parent produces the male gametes and the female parent produces the female gamete. When the male cells and the female cell fuse together, they form a third cell known as the zygote. This process of fusion of the male cell and the female cell is called fertilization. The zygote is the first cell of the new organism. It develops into a new organism over a period of time. In flowering plants, flower are the reproductive organs. Some flowers, like rose and sweet pea, contain both male and female reproductive organs. They are known as complete flowers. Complete flowers have stamen, pistils, petals, and sepals. Some flowers, like corn and papaya, contain only male or the female reproductive organs. They are known as incomplete flowers or unisexual flowers. The stamens produce pollen grains which contain male reproductive cells. These are surrounded by tough protective coat which saves them from drying out. The ovules present in the ovary in the lower part of the pistil contains the female cells. For fertilization to occur, the pollen grain must first be transferred from stamen to the stigma of the pistil. The process of transference of pollen grain from anther to the stigma is called pollination. The pollen grains are carried to the stigma of either the same flower or of a different flower of the same kind. Most often it occurs with the help of wind, water, insects. In nature, pollination takes place in two ways. Self-pollination, pollination which takes place within the same flower or between two flowers of the same plant is called self-pollination. Cross-pollination, the pollination which takes place between two flowers present on two different plants of same species is called cross-pollination. After pollination, the pollen grain forms a tube called pollen tube. The pollen tube grows through the style and reaches one of the ovule in the ovary. A pollen tube enters the ovule through a small opening. Pollen tube contains two male gametes. One of the male gamete passes through the pollen tube and reaches the egg in the ovule. Here it fuses with the egg and a zygote is formed. This fusion is called fertilization. After the fertilization, the petals, stamen, style and stigma of the flower fall off. The sepals dries up and holds on to the ovule. Only the ovary remains. It contains the fertilized ovule. Each fertilized ovule contains a zygote. The zygote then The zygote then begins to divide and forms an embryo. The embryo contains one or two cotyledons which store food for future. The fertilized and developed ovule contains embryo is called a seed. With time, the seed hardens and dries. The ovary wall may harden and become a pod as in poppy or become fleshy as in plum or tomatoes. A plant produces a large number of seeds. If all these fall below the plant and start growing, they will not get enough space, water, minerals, and the sunlight, and they will not develop into the healthy plants. Many of them may even die. Nature has arranged some agents of dispersal by which the seeds of a plant get scattered over a large area. This is called dispersal of seed. The agents of seed dispersal are wind, water, animal, and explosion of fruits. Seed dispersed by wind are dandelion, maple, madar. By animals, xanthium, tribulus, or arna. By water, lotus, coconut. By explosion, like pea, ladyfinger, balsam.
Now children, you know that plants do not only reproduce through flowers, they reproduce through other means also. Thank you children.